and how it helps. And to start with, I would like to stress upon, how the role of integration platforms have been evolving over the years, and why it is even more important to have an architectural strategy surrounding a middleware integration platform. And when we talk about architecture strategy and architecture, what is such a reference architecture and how it can be established is something that we will talk about today as well. And I will leave some pointers and probably will be able to share this presentation with you where I will detail out some of the considerations for such a detailed reference architecture as well. Now, to start with, I would like to talk about the evolution and the changes in the integration platforms and how the role of an integration platform or an enterprise integration domain or a middleware platform. I know many organizations call this particular discipline many ways, but it's all still the same. It's IT infrastructure level domain. And we will see how it has evolved over a period of time. And in aspect of that, I would like to talk about some of the proven enablers. We've seen integration platforms in use for quite some time now, for at least a couple of decades, where we call these platforms dedicatedly an integration platform. Now, some of the proven enablers in these platforms is to establish a B2B communication solution, to establish an EAI, which is application-to-application integration solutions and frameworks. We have seen BPMS, business process modeling, I think starting in 2003, 2004, when BPMS was picked up as a trending architectural paradigm, and we've seen BPMS evolve over a period of time, and BPM solutions are part of the middleware, and it's very important to establish an architecture around them. We've seen human workflow and task or case management kind of solutions be developed and deployed onto these middleware platforms. We've seen these middleware platforms used for end-to-end monitoring and end-to-end visibility, and maybe even going a step ahead and actually capturing metrics out of that monitoring and visibility for analytics. We have seen these platforms used for what we call service enablement, application modernization, legacy modernization, application integration. We are familiar with, connectivities into SAP, connectivities into Salesforce, whether the application is in-house or in the cloud. All such connectivity capabilities are core and central of establishing an architecture in the middleware. We've also seen middleware solutions surrounding messaging, pub/sub, high-speed messaging, complex event processing, and we have also seen solutions surrounding SOA architectural paradigms and API-based architectures and how to govern them, design time, runtime. These are concepts and these are architectural paradigms that have been established, proven, and enabled over the last decade or so. But I would like to talk about what's trending for the future. We've seen organizations talk about cloud a lot. We've seen organizations consider integration platform as a service in the cloud, but we've seen more and more organizations adopt a hybrid integration technology. We've seen what we meant by hybrid is, having an integration strategy with on-premise as well as, iPaaS as a combination to deal with all your IT assets within the premise and as well as in the cloud. Because more and more we have seen applications of a large enterprise move into the cloud, but at the same time we still have large enterprises having more than 50% of their applications on the premise. So that's a good balance. Why do we need a hybrid integration, and why we need a good architecture behind it is also very important. Real-time and streaming analytics, that's a really big trending area, especially in the IoT applications. And I don't want to talk too much about IoT, and that's not the purpose of this webinar. But trending-wise, real-time analytics and streaming analytics will be the forefront of all future IT-based services and solutions that organizations would want to leverage and sell to their customers. We've seen API-based architectures and all applications be developed with APIs, expose APIs and exchange APIs and be able to provision such APIs, govern those APIs development. We've seen a lot of functionality move to the front end with especially HTML5 and mobile apps becoming the forefront of some of our customer interfacing solutions. We've seen API be extensively used, and how to govern them, how to manage them, how to enforce API architecture and paradigms is also crucial. We've also seen extensive use of composite application frameworks, with agile applications as well, and we've seen solutions surrounding in-memory capabilities and scalable in-memory engines, like even Software AG's Terracotta. So these are the, I kind of labeled them as trending disruptors. So we've seen proven enablers, and we will be seeing trending disruptors. So these are the paradigms that we have to handle in our architecture, and we'll talk about why we need that architecture as well. Without an integration strategy, we know our landscape would look something like this, right? A mismatch of point-to-point integrations, no visibility, no control, and unsupportable. But we would like to be here, right? We would like to be in an organized IT landscape with a successful integration strategy and a middleware platform, call it enterprise service bus, call it integration platform, call it middleware. But it takes up the scope of all integration capabilities. And we will talk in detail on how to establish that role of such an enterprise service bus and what are the things that we have to do when we establish such an architecture. Now, before we go into reference architecture and talk about what that reference architecture is, we need to understand that middleware, ESBs, any integration platform, there are certain core functions that it actually does. And some of these core functions that you see on the screen are the core functions that we are used to. The last 10 years when we developed integration solutions, we talk about messaging, we talk about transformation, security, availability, federation of the buses, canonicals, mapping, services, processes, BPM, guaranteed delivery. All those are functions that we have been concentrating on and trying to create patterns and best practices surrounding them. But these are not the only things. There are certain core functions we need to be prepared for, the trending core functions. We talk about trending functions are big memory, in-memory capabilities, OAuth capabilities, SaaS integration, cloud enablement, streaming analytics, API management. So these are trending functions of a middleware that we have to be prepared for as well. Now, these are, I think, are the basis for formulating an enterprise reference architecture. Before, again, we talk about reference architecture, I would like to quickly go through what we perceive, or ProSoft perceives, as a maturity model for various enterprises that leverage a middleware platform. And in such a way, we kind of put together a level map or a maturity map. At a lowest level, what we see is typically definitely there's no integration strategy, no enterprise integration strategy. They don't have an integration platform. Most interfaces are point-to-point, maybe FTPs here and there, maybe some shell scripts moving files across from one application to the other, and things like that. So a lot of the integrations are homegrown and implemented in native technologies. That's the lowest level you would see. At level 1, again, there's still no enterprise integration strategy, but there's a mixed use of integration platform. Maybe enterprise had bought a small integration platform to take care of B2B, another small integration platform to take care of FTP. So such a level is level 1. There is not much of a data synchronization. There's no established patterns. Of course, it does not meet the complete enterprise needs, but still, the interfaces are just being built so that they meet the current requirements. We will definitely not see a lot of reuse or our ability to reduce the total cost of ownership. At level 2, an enterprise buys an enterprise class ESB. That means you have a platform which has all the capabilities that you need, and the platform meets the enterprise integration needs. And there is some minimal form of governance, maybe a minimal form of integration design, but at the same time, we are still not seeing the extensive reuse that we would like to see, or we're not seeing the ability to reduce the total cost of ownership in either developing these solutions and bring them and reducing the time to market. So here at this level, we've seen if an enterprise does not adopt an architectural strategy and adoption of an reference architecture, what will happen is this will be a proliferation of patterns, and then the environments grow on to become unsupportable in operations. You leave a mature or a integration platform for a couple of years at level 2, and it will become really unsupportable. Now, level 3 is the maturity level where we say the EI strategy is in place, a reference architecture is in place, and this reference architecture will bring in a lot of reuse at the services level, at the integrations level, at the interfaces level, and that in turn will reduce the time to market of newer integration solutions, and that in turn will bring in the total cost of ownership down. The environment, just because we have a reference architecture and patterns have been established and proven, the environments will be stable, much more supportable, and we would have a full-fledged SOA or API-based governance established so that the quality of the assets that are being deployed onto this platform are governed. And not only that, at this levels of maturity, we've seen clients actually add more what we call business solutions on top of this platform. I know that kind of sounds intriguing for some when we say do not bring application logic into middleware. That's an old school thought. But yeah, we've seen people use middleware platforms for real-time analytics and BPM and composite applications and much more value-added business solutions in the middleware layer rather than just having transportation and mediation. Of course, the highest level, we've also seen organizations establish really mature middleware platforms that are highly scalable, even multi-site, highly available, and with elastic cloud capabilities. And sometimes we term it as when such organizations reach such levels of maturity, they treat middleware as kind of everywhere. Now let's talk about reference architecture, and I know I talked about the architecture and where it lies in the maturity model, and how it is very important to attain those highest levels of maturity within the domain. A well-defined ESB reference architecture forms a strong foundation for SOA adoption in the enterprise. Not only, when I say SOA, it's not just web services. Your APIs, your RESTful or JSONs, everything, all of those assets need to be governed effectively. Now, integration problems can be solved in several different ways. It is important to solve them using established patterns. Now, this is a very important concept. Unlike application platforms, a middleware integration ESB platform grows every year, year in, year out. Every year you'll add 30, 40 integrations to the platform. And that's kind of very unique. There's no other similar domain or a platform that you can see that grows as fast and as quickly year in, year out. We have really crucial applications that we deploy, but those applications don't undergo as much of tremendous change every year. There might be some improvements here and there. So in this case, these middleware platforms are actually a different paradigm. Today they have 100 integrations. 2 years from now, they'll have 200 integrations. That means the capacity doubles. The amount of work the domain or a platform does doubles. So every 2 years, 3 years, we've seen platforms grow extensively. And very soon, if you don't establish patterns, if you don't establish those architectural guardrails, it will very quickly become unsupportable. And that's the reason we stress so much on this reference architecture. As such, as it's a design for ESB, just like as it's a design for application development. Now, what should ESB reference architecture do? It should lay down an ESB strategy and roadmap. It should create an architecture and design guidelines. It should lay down governance procedures. It should establish a deployment architecture. I will talk in detail about deployment architecture. It should establish a software architecture. And it establish a rapid time to market in the SDLC. There's a lot of things that we can do in the aspect of design, development, and testing of various solutions that we should be able to reduce the time to market. And eventually, yeah, the total cost of ownership, as I said, these platforms, they grow tremendously year in, year out. The cost of these platforms is actually the maintenance of them and their solutions for the lifetime. We build a $1 million solution on the platform. It should last for at least 6 to 7 years. So that's the maintenance of it is what we want to reduce as well. Now, let's talk about the important artifacts that get produced in such a reference architecture, effort or an initiative. Typically, these are some of the artifacts. ProSoft has over a period of time developed and attributed. Those are important. But definitely, every organization has its own alignment of needs. So I'll talk at a high level what these artifacts mean within the reference architecture guidelines. So ESB reference architecture guideline is a very high-level reference document that provides an overview of the ESB domain in aspects of design, build, and run. Now, typically, such a document is needed, I would say, for PMO office, for project managers, for business analysts who get business demands or requirements. Now they have to translate them into work for various domains. Maybe they need a small project for the application. They need another small project for the UI side. And they need a project for middleware side. And they have to divide up and say what needs to be done where. That's the job of an analyst and an enterprise architect. Now, this reference architecture guideline is a guideline for them to give them what are the capabilities within the domain, because these middleware platforms are really complex. You will have a processing engine, you'll have a messaging engine, you'll have a portal server, you'll have a mediator. There are multiple engines within these environments, and an analyst and an architect needs to know what is the right guideline for this whole domain. So that's kind of a high-level document. A deployment architecture guideline is about physical and logical architecture of various ESB components. As I just said earlier, there are handful of components, maybe half a dozen components in a typical environment, in an ESB environment. Now, how they are laid out physically and how they are laid out logically. When you develop newer solutions, how do their components get deployed into various of these engines and runtimes? So that's the kind of an architecture, and it talks about high availability, talks about the scalability, and federation of ESBs. So that's the deployment architecture document. The software architecture document is the prime document, I would say. That's the design document. That's the document that will document all the integration patterns, design patterns, and attribute to all the architectural paradigms like SOA, BPM, B2B, composite application frameworks, and any business activity monitoring, or even real-time analytics and streaming analytics nowadays. Now, this document is the one which establishes the guardrails for all software design. We'll also have things like strategy and implementation roadmap. We'll have requirements and capabilities guideline. That's another important document. It's actually a requirements matrix that establishes the role, responsibility, and capabilities of various components of the ESB to formulate a solution architecture. Now, this is one we've seen in many organizations, a very crucial, artifact that needs to be developed. This actually kind of establishes the role and responsibility. Those two words are very important. When you have a established ESB, and you will run into projects where you are trying to define what an ESB does, what an application does, what an application does not do, what an ESB does not do. That handshake between the teams and the role and the responsibility of these domains is very important, and we need to establish that as part of that requirement guideline. So for example, I can say that the ESB will do the routing for this transformation, or I can say, no, the ESB will never do the routing. It is the responsibility of the application. Now, who makes that decision is this requirements, ESB requirements guideline reference document. Now, that is very important to establish such a requirements document upfront, so that all the integrations that are subsequently designed and developed will be consistent in the approach. Of course, we will also have some, other artifacts like SOA and API governance guides, where we talk about governance policies, how to, maintain the assets quality through life cycles, how to establish approval points, review points, enforcement points, and also we talk about runtime governance as well in that document. Other artifacts as part of reference architecture that usually get developed is also, of course, ESB development handbook, conventions and best practices handbook. These are some of the materials that you're already familiar with and must have already established. But some of them, like SOA service and schema design standards handbook, if you're following through with extensive or elaborate SOA adoption, and XSD-based schema design and canonical design or data designs. These are important to establish patterns with even in those paradigms as well. Of course, troubleshooting guide and support guide are some other artifacts that can be created as part of this reference architecture initiative. Now, how do we go about establishing such a reference architecture? Now, typically, it is the role of the owner of reference architecture is typically either the enterprise architecture group or the integration architecture group. If you have a specific integration architecture group, they can be the owners, or it is typically the enterprise architecture group which will establish the reference architecture. Definitely, we will need a business executive sponsor. We need the IT executive sponsor, but enterprise architects, business analysts, any process architects, system architects, definitely the integration architect, infrastructure architects, and data architects are the ones, along with, this could be people from middleware domain or even from the application domains as well. They are the ones who will form I don't want to call it COE or Center of Excellence, or Competency Center, or just call it a team who will establish reference architecture. They should go through what we call an exercise of brainstorming and working sessions over a period of few weeks to establish this architecture. Now, the process in which we do this is it's a simple 5-step process. First and foremost, we define the requirements of the domain of the ESB and its components. Second step is we analyze and perform gap analysis on existing designs, existing implementations, existing logical and physical landscape. And we also, third step, we assess the IT skills and the technology capabilities that are being leveraged with the investments that the organization has made into already. Step 4 is typically when if we are at a stage where an organization is reevaluating some of the technology investments it's made, so we can do some technology vendor evaluations, platform evaluations. So that's typically the step 4. Now, the input and output from this 1, 2, 3, and 4 will then be used to define the implementation strategy, to define the reference architecture, and define the software architecture, and so on. Just to reiterate, when we do the requirements, we want to make sure that we take into consideration the customer view, business view, and IT view, define various business scenarios, define various IT scenarios, and then come out with a robust requirements document. We have some templates that have almost 250 unique requirements. We go through these working group sessions, go through each requirement and say, how do we establish role and responsibility surrounding that requirement for the ESB? I'll just give you a good example. For example, how to establish, say, security within web services. That's a requirement right now. Who will do it? Will the ESB do it? Will the ESB, while it's mediating, will it do the WSO2, I'm sorry, W3.org based web service security implementation like Kerberos tokens or SAML tokens. So such a requirement is defined, and who does it, how it is done, and which domain is responsible is what we will define in that requirements template. Gap analysis, again, we talk about tools and integration methodology and define the gaps that need to be filled and refine the ESB implementation with those gap analysis report. Some of the IT assets and IT and skills assets, actually even people and technology is what we assess during this assessment report. Find any needs for infrastructure, find any needs for training, and an improvement on governance and policies and procedures as well. Of course, the fourth step I talked about product and tools evaluation and look about recommendations for utilizing different functions or newer functions within the platforms as well, and upgrade and upgrading to a newer version of the platform is also part of such an evaluation in step 4. When we come to defining the actual reference architecture itself, as I know I talked about the reference architecture document, the deployment architecture document, governance guides, and implementation roadmap. These are the artifacts that we would create and deliver to the teams. At this point, I have some more topics that would cover actually and how such a reference architecture is established and how the integration patterns are established. And these are slides that we use actually for considerations before we start the reference architecture implementation or initiative. Establishing canonical and entity modeling strategy, that's very important as well, especially when we use services, either RESTful or document roles. It's important to define the right canonical and entity modeling through XSDs or the document types and things like that. But XSD is very popular and visuals, and the way you structure them and the way you model them is very important, and that needs to be established. Also establish best practices for ESB. Analyze, define, and document best practices, how to use management and UI console, how to do error handling, how to do logging and notification, escalation of errors and management services, build and deployment. Of course, that's very important. As we understand, these domains undergo changes all the time and every time, and the build phase and the deployment phase is very crucial in the supportability of these platforms. So to establish a well-refined build and deployment process is very important as well. Of course, high availability. ESBs are again transactional systems and heavy-hitting transactional systems. You have to have a continuous capacity planning and sizing review at least every couple of years. You definitely need to have established the high availability and scalability architecture as well. Some of those guidelines are naming standards and conventions. Collaborative development is another good thing that's coming up. Whether your processes and procedures, will it support agile development? What are the best ways to do about it? And things like that are very important to establish as part of this reference architecture. At this time, I would like to leave time and give time for question and answers. And James, can you take it up and see if there's any questions that I can address?
Thanks. Thank you so much, Ram. So we are open for questions. As I typed earlier, please place your questions in the questions tab. and we'll address them here itself.
Hey James, we have a couple of questions here. Ram, one question goes and wanted to understand what are the business needs of adopting SOA and API governance along with ESB?
Well, I would not call it a business need. When we say, again, to reiterate on the question, are you saying is SOA needed or is SOA governance needed?
SOA and API governance.
Okay. Definitely, see, I think governance is crucial for the architectural paradigms that they are, right? So why, again, to understand, do we need SOA as an architectural paradigm for an enterprise, or do we need API-based architectural paradigm for an enterprise, is the decision that the enterprise had already made. Now, once you adopt an architectural paradigm, whether it's SOA, based on web services, which are RESTful and Docker role and things like that, or maybe JSON, or your architecture paradigm is completely on localized API management and exposing APIs between applications as well. Now, that is an architectural paradigm that you have adopted. Now, what are the goals for adopting any architectural paradigm is to get a high level of reuse, and thereby reducing the cost of implementation over the period of time, and then eventually all the benefits that SOA is supposed to bring in. But a lot of times clients forget is you can't really bring in all those benefits that SOA is supposed to bring in unless you have a governance model surrounding it. And the governance is nothing but like a cop policing the SDLC of various assets of your paradigm. So within your paradigm, if your asset is an API, or your asset could be a JSON, or your asset could be a web service. Now, as it is being developed in its life cycle, somebody initially conceived when a project was brought about, an analyst conceived that a service has to be built, or an architect conceived that a service has to be built. But subsequently, it comes to project development and development teams, and a development manager approves and goes ahead with the development, and then a testing manager tests it, while the operational manager accepts it and deploys it into production. Now, all these are areas of governance. So eventually, if we want to get to see that high reuse and cost reduction in cost that SOA promises, we have to make sure that these assets that we are developing are governed to the quality and to the process and procedures that we want to establish. So this reference architecture that I talked about all now are actually the tools for these governors. So at any point, for example, few services need to be developed. They are conceived, right? The analyst has been conceived those services, but they're not designed yet. Maybe the enterprise architect designs them, and somebody else has to review, or a integration team designs them, and an enterprise architect has to review them. So such a governance has to be put into place that an enterprise architect always reviews a design of a service, right? But what does that enterprise architect review against? He has to review against a guideline, and that's what the guideline is. The reference architecture is your guideline. So your reference architecture is nothing but a tool to perform governance, perform policing of your assets, quality of development, and that is very needed. And it is always there. I mean, governance is always there in an organization in some form or the other, whether you use an automated tool like WSSR or Centrosite, or you might use a simple email or a phone call asking the enterprise architect to review your WSDL, right? But see, the governance is always there in every organization. The way the governance is enforced and made it easier by automation, made it part of day-to-day life is very important, and that's when a successful governance implementation will bring in a successful SOA strategy and value add. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Ram. I have one more question here in which we wanted to find out what are the major complexities or hurdles we face while implementing the reference architecture here.
Well, definitely, we've gone through and seen maturity models that I proposed and showed earlier. We don't want to establish a reference architecture where a client is at a level 1 or level 0, right? Because they don't have an integration strategy in place. They don't have an integration platform that they have adopted. Those are the first things that need to happen, right? You have to adopt a platform as a middleware platform for the enterprise, and then you establish reference architecture on top of it. So how effective it is? Yes, definitely. Once you establish reference architecture, we have seen the time to market of integration solutions come down rapidly. We have seen the consistency in the way projects are implemented and developed and released and deployed. For example, integration projects go for 5-6 months. Whatever development that you did this year, will there be integrations that will be developed in similar patterns 2 years from now? How will you ensure it? Without your reference architecture, you cannot ensure that. And 2 years from now, there will be another developer or another vendor who's coming and developing things for you. If you don't establish patterns in reference architecture and tell them to develop solutions according to those reference architecture patterns, then obviously they will go about their own patterns and their own methodology. And that's when you will see an inconsistency, lesser reuse, and things like that. So eventually, reference architecture is the only way that will bring in that reuse and reduced time to market and reduced total cost of ownership of the domain.
Thank you, Ram. James, those are the questions I have. I'll hand it over back to you.
Yep, thanks, Ankit. Thank you so much. To those of you who have additional questions, you can always reply to the thanks email, which I'm going to send after this webinar, and we'll address them individually to you. And thank you so much for your time today on the webinar, and we'll look forward to see you on our next webinar on May 20th. The topic will be Intelligent Business Operations with APAMA, Software AG APAMA. It's real-time streaming analytics. And to those of you who have not registered, I'll share the registration details in the thanks note. You can register yourselves for the webinar, and we look forward to see you on May 20th. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead.